Okay, this is Chapter 5, hands-on exercise number 3. We are working with our pivot table as we were in hands-on exercise number 2. We're going to do some pivot table manipulation here. We're going to do things like setting filters, inserting and customizing a slicer, which is a type of filter. We're going to create a calculated field, and we're going to show values as calculations. So let's get back into our pivot table. We've got our pivot table fields on the right. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a layer of filtering. We're going to take addition and we're going to put it into the filters area in the pivot table fields. That appeared in row 1. We see A1 says addition and B1 says all. So now we have a new filter for addition. We also have filter for everything in the rows and columns of our pivot table, which would be discipline and copyright year. So let's go ahead and click on B1 and the drop down there, and we're going to do select multiple items, and we are going to click the all button to deselect everything, and we only want additions 1 and 2, and we'll click OK. We'll go to copyright year and we'll click that drop down. We're going to deselect 2014 and 15 so that only 16 and 17 remain. So we've done two forms of filtering. We have not done any filtering with the discipline, but we're going to create a slicer which will help us do that. Again, put your cursor in the pivot table, go to Analyze, and we want to do Insert Slicer from the filter area. Our slicer will be only on the discipline category. So notice what it has done. It has created a type of filter with buttons for each of the 9 categories. And I want to show you that since we don't have any addition 1 or 2s in 2016 and 17 for family, miscellaneous, and research and stats, those don't appear as options for us. We do have the other 6 categories from aging and death to social psychology, and those appear both in the pivot table and in the slicer. If, for example, we wanted to deselect one of those 6 that remain, we can hold down the control button and left click on that name. So I have now selected, or actually deselected, aging and death. It appears as white. It is not one of the 5 that is now selected, and if we look into the pivot table, it's gone as well. So now what we want to do is customize this slicer. We can customize the buttons and the size of the slicer itself. So let's go to the slicer tool options, and we are going to make from the buttons, we're going to make the columns 2. So we have 2 columns of buttons, and we're going to change the button width to 1.5. Okay, so now the column width for the buttons is 1.5. The slicer itself has 2 columns. Okay, we're going to change the height of the slicer to 2. So I can just put in a 2, or I can do it like I've done it right there. So now we have a slicer with 2 columns of buttons, and the slicer itself is a height of 2. We're going to go ahead and put a style on the slicer, and I'll go ahead and click on the downward arrow to get more. I want to do dark slicer style dark 1. So if we look at our slicer now, it's customized a little bit. It has 2 columns. We've selected a dark slicer style. We have deselected aging and death. We have customized the buttons and the size of the slicer itself. Let's go ahead now and create our calculated field. Put our cursor back into the pivot table, and we're going to hit Analyze, and one of the things that we can do is a calculation, and we're going to select fields, items, and sets, and in this case we're going to do a calculated field. Now the authors get paid 10% of all book sales, so we're going to create a royalty calculated field. So I want to type author royalties in the field name, and I'm going to insert a formula, and I'm going to use the field list that I have here, and the formula says it's 10% of total book sales. So I'll double click on total book sales, and I'll multiply that by 0.1. And then I'll click Add. And then I want to insert that into our pivot table. Okay, now that that's inserted into our pivot table, we have new columns. Columns C and E and G all deal with author royalties, which are 10% of the sales. And that's an easy calculation to see. We're going to go ahead and move the slicer so that it's beneath the pivot table itself. And then we are going to wrap text on C and E. So I'm going to highlight C and E, and I'll do, from the Home tab, wrap text. Okay, so we've wrapped the text there. We're going to set the row height of row 5 to 30, and the column width of column C and E to 12. Okay, so I've done a little customizing there. We've inserted our calculated field, and we're ready to go. Let's go ahead and save this real quick. For our final step in this hands-on exercise, we're going to create a copy of the pivot table worksheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the word pivot table down in the worksheet area, and then I'm going to do move or copy, and I want to create a copy, and I want it to come before the books data worksheet. I'll hit OK, and notice that we have a new tab for a worksheet called Pivot Table 2. That's what we're going to be working with. We're going to do some customization. The first thing that I want to do is delete the slicer. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight the slicer, right click, and hit remove, and that pivot table is going to go away. We're also going to remove all of the filters that we have just applied. So we're going to have all the years, all the editions, and all the disciplines. Okay, so I'm getting it back to a little bit of the normal of what it used to be. We've done the editions, we've done the disciplines, we've done the copyright years. We are also going to do this sum of authors' royalties. We'll click on that and hit remove field. Basically what we have done is we've put the pivot table back into its original form. And this is sales by discipline. We have all of the disciplines and all of the copyright years. So we're back to normal. And this is again pivot table 2. Okay, now what we want to do is right now in the disciplines or wherever we are, let's click on any of the values. Okay, let's go to the Analyze in the Pivot Table Tools and Field Settings. Something that we haven't looked at is Show Values As. Now, we have the raw values there, but let's say we wanted to know what percent of aging and death, that category, what percent of the 2014 sales are the total sales. Okay, so we could have raw values as we have here. We could have percents. We can do a lot of things, and let's show you how we do that. Let's go to Show Values As, and we have this no calculation. Click on that and do percent of row total, and then click OK. Alright, now what we see is the data has completely changed. If you look, the percent of the grand total of aging and death, 2014 is 28.69% of all aging and death sales. Okay, and we have that same thing. If we want to click in D12, for example, and that's the social problems row, 27.6% 23% of all social problem sales come from copyright year 2016. So we've got that. Okay, or we can go back, and I'll click on that again. Field settings, show values as, and we can do percent of grand total. Okay, if we did that, it shows each one of these boxes represents, okay, so B5, aging and death for 2014, is 3.07% of all of the overall 2014 through 2017 sales. Okay, so we can change that however we want to see that. Let's go ahead and click Save, and we'll move on to the next hands-on exercise.